I think it's fair to say that we can often have an uncomfortable relationship with work. Would you agree? I think this is true in part just from our bumper stickers, and I have a little collection here. Born to play golf, forced to work. Whoa, that's pretty strong. Or work is a four-letter word. That's not a compliment, by the way. Or I had a life, but my job ate it. That's even darker still. Or I'm in no hurry, I'm on my way to work. Also not the most positive thing. Or this one's probably the worst. On my way to work, please kill me. That's pretty much at the end of the rope there. But we human beings, for some reason, we have this sort of odd relationship with work at times. In fact, we even might say on a Friday, thank goodness it's Friday, it's the weekend, meaning we don't have to work for a couple of days. Now, where does all of this come from? There's a man by the name of Moses that we believe authored the first few books of the Bible. And in the very first pages, Moses tells the story of the world going wrong, like everything collapses. And part of what gets messed up is he says that work becomes difficult. There's thorns, there's toil, there's blood and sweat, and our relationship to work that once was good no longer is perfect, and so we struggle with this. And so Moses from the very beginning is saying we're probably going to be making bumper stickers that illustrate this tension that we have with the subject of labor. And then in the story of Moses, historically, we think he lived about 120 years. The first 40 years, he has a front row seat to slavery. So for 4 decades, he watches as people who are powerful in the workplace force it on people who are in a position of weakness, and work is ugly. He sees it. And then the second 40 years of his life, he goes and he's a shepherd in the middle of nowhere, just quietly toiling away. There's no reward in his work. No one's applauding him. Work is just sort of in the distance. And so he tastes what work is like when you're working hard and no one recognizes it. And then the last 40 years of his life, he's leading a group of people on a journey, and the story goes that these people are constantly fighting with one another. They don't like where they're going. They're complaining. They're just a mess. And he learns about the inefficiency of work, that they are not headed in a straight line. This is a mess. And so Moses has this story to tell us that work is hard. There's a reason why we have this uncomfortable relationship. And then in a place in the Bible called Psalm 90, he offers out this cry to God on the subject of work. And this is what he says. He says, "May the favor of our Lord God rest on us. Establish the work of our hands for us." Yes, establish the work of our hands. It's this cry, please make work meaningful. We need help. So if you go through history, now we're going to shoot into the future from Moses, Jesus actually has something to say about work, which is interesting. And this is where I want to pick up in Mark chapter 1. As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Interesting. Their job is referenced. Their profession is listed. Why would that be? It's interesting when you read the story of Jesus, beginning with his own life. What we know is that Jesus lived about 33 years on earth. 33 years. But the first 30, he was a carpenter, most likely a stonemason. And very little is said. I think this is interesting. What we know of Jesus is that about 90% of his life, he's just quietly doing work. So he elevates work. Apparently it's important. And then you have examples like in this passage where fishermen are named. And in the story of Jesus, you have fishermen and shepherds and farmers and government officials and business people. And then in the early Christian church, they named tent makers. There's a woman named Lydia who is in international textile work, selling a cloth that is purple. Throughout this story, why are all these professions named? I mean, it's expensive to put together a scroll. You don't just waste pages. It's not like a Word document where you just spill everything out. You have to be very careful about what you put on the page because there's an economy of space, and you have professions everywhere that are listed. So what this suggests to me first is, as we encounter our work, is that work is good, not bad. Work is holy, it is not evil. Work is sacred. After all, Jesus is constantly acknowledging. The story is constantly talking about people's professions. This is listed for us to care about. So I think maybe that's a starting point. Work is sacred. Work is actually valuable. And you've probably seen it, but there's a little prayer by someone by the name of Brother Lawrence. And Brother Lawrence was a monk, but he wasn't at the top, right? He wasn't some great spiritual and mighty person. So he often didn't think much of himself, and he had a task of working in the kitchen. But he has a prayer that's been captured that's so beautiful because all he's working in the kitchen, just doing a job. And maybe you've seen this before. He says, Lord of all pots and pans and things, since I've not time to be a saint by doing lovely things, or watching late with thee, or dreaming in the dawn light, or storming heaven's gates, make me a saint by getting meals and washing up the plates. The saint of the one who just does the dishes. Warm all the kitchen with thy love and light it with thy peace. Forgive me all my worrying and make my grumbling cease. Thou who didst love to give men food in room or by the sea, accept this service that I do it unto thee. Brother Lawrence is acknowledging that work is holy, that he doesn't have to be some great and amazing saint doing some incredible headline spiritual work, that just faithfully serving in the kitchen is holy work. It's sacred work. I think that's the first lesson we get from Jesus. But then Jesus pushes our thinking, and this is where it really gets good, okay? So it begins with this. Again, as Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. But then here he ups the game. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. And at once they left their nets and followed him. Now this is interesting, intriguing. What does Jesus mean when he says you're going to fish for people? I think there's three options. One, does he mean, all right, guys, what I want you to do is hoist your sails, get up some speed, throw the nets out, and we're going to go real near the shore where people are swimming. And we're literally going to scoop people up in the nets. I mean, is it a literal reading of this? You are going to become fishermen of human beings. We're going to capture a bunch of people in this net. Is that what he means? Probably not. Does he mean that it's time for you to stop this profession and now you're going to completely do a different job? Well, the problem with that interpretation is if you keep reading the story, the fishing boat keeps coming up. And in fact, there's an instance where Jesus tells Simon that he wants him to go fishing. And then at the very end of the stories that we have about Jesus, in John chapter 21, his followers, these same disciples, are fishing. So it doesn't seem likely that he's inviting them to stop their profession because they just keep doing it. Which leaves a third possibility, I believe, which is that Jesus is asking them to think about their work differently. You are no longer just fishing for fish, but you need to think about fishing for people. In other words, the purpose of your work is to somehow bless people, to love people, to make a difference for people. You need to recalibrate in your mind your perspective about your work. We might think about it this way. Stay with me for this. I think we often try to figure out how is it that I should love my work. Do I change my boss? Do I change jobs altogether? Do I just try to get a better attitude? Oh, how do I love my work? That can be a difficult challenge because work can go up and work can go down. Love my work is hard. I think what Jesus is asking us to do is to consider flipping that on its head and saying, work your love. You get that? Work your love. In other words, you wake up at the beginning of the day and your job is you are a fisher of people. Your job is to love people. And the way that you love people is through your craft. You're a fisherman. You're an accountant. You're in the supply chain. You're a physician or a nurse. But when you wake up in the morning, your first task is not figuring out how am I going to love this work that I'm doing, but rather how am I going to love people? And the way that I do that is through my craft. And so you can wake up in the morning and you can love well your new work, whether you're in a bull market or a bear market. You can love just as well if the company's doing great or not so great. If the margins are strong or the margins are narrow, you can love just as well. In fact, I would argue, in some ways, love can be even more powerful when the actual work of the company, the state of the market, the circumstances around you are not good. We might be able to do our best work when things are actually the toughest and the roughest and things feel like they're falling apart. You see what Jesus is doing here? He's completely turning everything upside down. Don't constantly try to love your work, but work your love. Make that the starting point, and then success has a whole new definition. And then you start to ply your trade simply with the idea of how do I love people through what I'm doing? Now, in the moments we have remaining, what does it mean that we love people through our work? A couple of possibilities that I would like to suggest to you. First, that we do good work, that we actually do quality work. Now, when I was in high school, some of you may recognize this photograph. Does anybody know what this is? This is all the way back in 1989. I'm dating myself. And I was in high school, and there was a big airline incident. And I'm going to actually read to you the description of what happened. It was in February of 1989. United Airlines Flight 811 took off from Honolulu. Do you remember this, anyone? It was actually headed to New Zealand. The 747 had climbed to 22,000 feet when the forward cargo door of the jet blew open, tearing a huge hole in the side of the plane. 9 passengers were immediately sucked out of the plane to their deaths. The 2 right engines were damaged by flying debris and taken out of commission. The plane was 100 miles from land. The captain, David Cronin, brought all of his wisdom and 38 years of piloting experience to bear. So now I'm going to read you a description of what he did. To compensate for the lack of thrust from the 2 right engines, he struggled to hold the control column steady with his hands while using his feet to put pressure on the control floor rudder to stabilize the plane. His stickiest problem, however, was deciding how fast to fly. He slowed the plane as close to the stall speed as possible to keep the air rushing over the plane from further widening the hole in the fuselage. Because the hole had changed the aerodynamics of the huge craft, the usual data regarding stall speed was no longer relevant. The pilot, knowing this, had to use his best judgment. Furthermore, since the plane had just taken on 300,000 pounds of fuel for the long flight, it was too heavy to land without collapsing the landing gear. Then he encountered a new problem. The wing flaps used to slow the plane down were not working properly. He would have to land the plane at 195 miles an hour compared to the normal 170 miles an hour. The jet weighed 610,000 pounds, well above Boeing's recommended maximum stress load of 564,000 pounds. Nevertheless, Captain Cronin made one of the smoothest landings the rest of the crew could remember amid the cheers of the passengers. Airline experts called the landing miraculous. A few days after the harrowing experience, an interviewer asked Captain Cronin about his first thoughts following the loss of the cargo door. He said, "I said a prayer for my passengers momentarily and then got back to business." Now, I'm going to read to you a description that comes to us from a Lutheran theologian, a theologian type, who's reflecting on what Cronin did. He says, when United Airlines Flight 811 got into trouble, the greatest gift Captain Cronin had for his passengers was his experience and good judgment. In those moments of peril, it mattered not to the passengers how Captain Cronin related to his coworkers or how he communicated his faith to others. The critical issue was this: was he competent enough as a pilot to bring that badly damaged plane in safely? Through our work, we can touch God in a variety of ways. But if the call of the Christian is to participate in God's ongoing creative process, the bedrock of our ministry, of our work, has to be competency. We must use our talents in as competent a manner possible. Competency is the basic value. Interesting. When you and I get on an airplane, in fact, it annoys me a little bit, but I don't really care if the pilot's friendly to me. I don't really care if he's a good guy or she's a good gal. I don't really care about a number, whether they can tell good jokes, that they've told a billion times, right? What do you care about? I want you to love me because you're really good at your job. In the 20th century, there's a British fiction writer, literary figure by the name of Dorothy Sayers, and she prods spiritual people. She says, too often when we talk about spirituality, what the church has to say a carpenter is, don't get drunk and show up for church on Sunday morning. Don't get drunk, show up for church, mind your business. But what she says, what we really ought to say to a carpenter is, and I'm quoting her here, make good tables. In our work, we love people well with our competency. By doing great work, producing a good product, being faithful and reliable, that's love. That's the beginning of love. We love people well through the competency of doing well. But I think Jesus has even more to say than that. And so this is the final point. I think Jesus says that we ought to leverage our time together. After all, I hate to break it to you, but when we work together, that is the lion's share of our working hours in our life, by far. That is the biggest piece of the pie. So how do we find ways to love one another? My very first job was working in a maintenance and grounds department at a nursing home care facility. Weed eaters and lawnmowers and fixing toilets and wheelchairs and kind of just doing whatever was necessary. So I'm this teenage kid, first job, but the best job that we could be given in this place, so imagine I'm 16 years old, the best job is when the boss would say, I need you to take the company truck, all right, and go to a local mill to get a stack of wood that you then bring back in and we use to burn in our real wood burning fireplace in our cafeteria. And one day my boss said to me, my supervisor, Alex, I need you to go get some wood. And this is just incredible. You get in the truck. Do you remember when you just had a license just for, the freedom and the beauty? And I'm in that truck and driving to go. And pretty soon I realized I've missed several turns. And I've probably been daydreaming about, some girl or the glory of driving or some new 1980s song that's just, come out on the radio or something. And I'm going to get in trouble if I don't get back on track. And so I notice ahead of me that there's a circular gravel driveway in front of a residence. And so I go up to this gravel driveway without slowing down, mind you. And I do a 180 through this gravel driveway, spraying gravel up, kind of a rooster tail up, nearly wipe out a dog on the front lawn, get back on track, pick up the wood. I'm back at the nursing home. Everything is happy. I'm stacking the wood, and over the loudspeaker comes Alex Bryan, would you please report to the administrator's office, the CEO's office? Now, this wasn't unusual because the CEO would often call us if he needed something done, and I happily, merrily made my way. His assistant said, please, go into his office, and I walk in, and the administrator tells me something I had never heard before from him. This instruction had never come to me. He said, sit down. Sat down on his nice leather sofa. He said, I just got a phone call from a resident in our community who said that a truck with our name and phone number on the side of it, and unfortunately we only had one company truck, just called in and said that the truck went flying through his gravel driveway, nearly killed his dog. There's gravel over his front yard. Can you explain this? And there was no way I was going to talk my way out of this. And so I said, well, this is what happened. And he said, thank you. That will be all for now. You can go back and stack wood. I'm stacking wood, and it's no longer joy. right? I mean, this is what is coming next? And my license is gone. My parents are going to be called. I'm in deep, deep trouble at this moment. About 5 minutes later, Alex Bryan, will you please report to the administrator's office? And this is like dead man walking, right? This is the last walk of your life. Go in. His assistant says, go into his office, and I walk in. CEO looks me in the eye and says, "Catch." Catch. He says, "Catch." And he reaches into his pocket and he throws me his keys. And he said, "Alex, you know my sedan." Everyone knew his sedan, by the way. Special parking spot. No one went near it. No one parked to the left or the right of it. I mean, this is a sedan of a CEO. "My sedan," he said, "needs some work done across town. Would you mind taking my car, having the work done, and bringing it back?" I'm like looking for trap doors. I'm like, what is a trick question? What are you doing to my mind here? He said, "You can go now." I walked out, got into that car. Don't you know, I'm like 10 and 2, 35 miles an hour all the way across town. Got the work done on the car, brought it back, delivered him his keys. He never said another word about it. My supervisor never knew about it. Immediate supervisor, my parents never, no one. How do you think I worked for him the next 4 years that I was in that job? What do you think that did for my soul? Forgiveness and grace and confidence. And you see, he leveraged work to do what? To love. To love a stupid 16-year-old kid who probably should have been fired on the spot. And you look back at moments in your life like that and you say, work can be beautiful. Work's about competency, yes, first, but then secondly, it's about seizing opportunities to love. Let me finish with this story. Came across an article not terribly long ago about a woman who was a checkout counter person at a grocery store. And as the story went, she was very friendly with people. She would learn customers' names, stories about their life. She was always engaging, telling people she would pray for them. And people loved this woman who was the checkout person at the grocery store. And the problem was that this was creating some difficulty. Now, I don't know how you are when you go to the grocery store or to Walmart, but a moment of confession. When I get my groceries, I'm always looking for what on the way out? The shortest line. Which is you're weighing. I don't know. My wife and I have, when you're with your spouse, you're like arguing. No, line 7 is shorter. 9, no, I don't know. Well, let's both try it and see which is. Let's hold our place in line and hedge our bets, right? Well, what was happening was that this woman was so popular because of the way she was loving on people, ministering to people, and connecting, that people were intentionally choosing the line, and that line was getting longer and longer every day than all the other lines. And folks were actually choosing to spend more time in line than being able to check out quick because they needed that moment. Well, the reason this story ended up in an article was because the woman died. And there was a memorial service at a little church, and it was standing room only, packed out the back door. Not with church people, not with religious types, not even with family, but with customers of that store who were there to honor that woman. And so the question is obvious for all of us today. How long is your line? How long is the line at your desk, in your office, your cubicle? The line that comes to you through your work because people just can't miss being loved by you. And as a company, how long is our line? Our people will line up for love. They will line up to be cared for. I think that's the question. That's the question Jesus puts to us. Work is difficult. It's hard, Moses says. Jesus says, focus on loving people well, and that makes all the difference in the world. All the difference. Amen.